This is a 2006 Mercedes-Benz CL65 AMG, and it is truly insane for three reasons. Number one, when this car was new back in 2006, the MSRP was around $190,000, which is roughly $240,000 in 2018 money. Number two, you can pick one of these up today for around $30,000 just 12 years later. And the number three reason why this car is so insane, because under the hood there is a twin-turbo V12 with 604 horsepower and 738 pound-feet of torque. This is going to be a fun video. Yes, that's right. I'm standing next to a twin-turbo V12 $240,000 Mercedes with 600 horsepower and 738 pound-feet of torque that you can buy today for like 30 grand. I borrowed this CL65 from VIP Auto here in Pennsylvania, a car concierge service for purchasing and leasing new cars without visiting a dealership. The CL65 has just 69,000 miles, and today I'm going to take you on a tour of it. But first, a little history. Now, the CL is what Mercedes used to call the S-Class Coupe, and this was the very first AMG 65 model. It debuted along with the S65 and the SL65, using the same twin-turbo V12 they still use today with basically the same power and torque numbers. I remember when I was in high school, this thing came out, and I remember thinking that it was insane even back then. Mercedes is putting how much power in the CL? It was crazy. Ezra Dyer, who's the best modern automotive writer, he summed it up best in Automobile Magazine in an article about the SL65. He wrote, "Mercedes-Benz makes an engine with more torque, it's just they put it in school buses." So today I'm going to show you around this thing. I'm going to show you all of its interesting quirks and features, as if its mere existence isn't quirky enough. And then I'm going to get it out on the road and see how it drives, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. And for more of my thoughts on the CL65, click the link below to visit autotrader.com/oversteer, where I've also compiled a list of the cheapest AMG cars currently listed for sale on AutoTrader. Now I'm going to start with the doors, because simply getting into the CL65 is interesting. Now this is such a giant, huge, opulent luxury coupe that the doors are absolutely massive, and so they open a little bit differently than a normal car's doors. There is a hinge to open them, but there's also this giant mechanism underneath the hinge that I've never seen in any other car. And when you pull the door open, they don't just swing open, but they also come forward several inches in order to provide a wider opening so you can get inside. I think the theory here is that if the doors didn't come open like that, they would just have to swing so wide that you'd be hitting the car next to you in a parking lot. But because the doors come forward a little bit, it gives you a little extra room to get inside without having to open the doors so wide and damage the car next to you. You can see the interesting thing is when the doors are open in a CL, they're actually halfway down the front fender towards the wheel. You will never see this in any other car. A couple of other interesting things about the doors. When the doors are open, take a look in the door jamb down here. It's like full chrome. Most cars just have a continuation of the door panel, or it's painted. Maybe there's a little reflector there. Not this thing. It's chrome, because even though you'll never actually see that panel, Mercedes wanted it to look nice, and so it does. The other interesting thing about the doors is this car has soft closed doors. This was a very unusual feature in 2006. Basically what it means is if you push the door closed and it doesn't quite make it at sort of a little bit askew, the door will automatically close itself the last bit of distance, so you don't have to go back to the car and push the doors closed. I suspect this feature was especially popular with sort of the elderly customers that the CL was known for. When they were weakly shutting the doors, the door would help assist and close the rest of the way. But I'm not done with the door panel just yet, because the door panel in this car is especially interesting. If you take a look at the door panel, you will notice that it's rather complicated. In fact, I just counted 21 separate buttons on the driver's door panel, not counting the door lock and the door handle. Now, my personal favorite are the mirror controls. We'll start below the actual mirror control itself. There's a little button you push that folds the mirrors in. That's not all that unusual. A lot of luxury cars have that. The unusual part is that there's a separate little button that folds the mirrors back out. It's not just a little switch. You push it one way and it folds them in, and one way it folds them out. Mercedes made two separate buttons for this purpose, and that continues above the mirror control. There are two separate buttons for left and right mirrors. You want to control the right mirror, you press the right mirror button. The left mirror is the left mirror button. Every other car simply has a switch for this purpose, but apparently Mercedes decided a switch simply would not do. I also like the fact that the mirror control itself is shaped like the mirror. It isn't just a little square like in every other car. It sort of has that mirror shape to it, so you know exactly what you're adjusting when you push it. A couple of other interesting items in the door panel. If you look below all the mirror controls, you'll find the window switches. That's not all that uncommon. What is uncommon is that the switch to lock and unlock the windows so your passengers can't roll them down, it's absolutely massive. It's like 2 inches by 1 inch. Every other car has this tiny little switch down there, but this thing has this huge button so that you can lock the windows. Next up, we move on to the seat controls, which of course are also on the door panel. Now the seat controls are not that unusual. There's the regular seat control. You move forward, backward, the backrest, the headrest, whatever. There's also memory settings. That's pretty standard. What I find unusual is the controls for the heated and cooled seats. Now they're not that weird. There's a button for heated and a button for cooled, but take a look above them. There's little lights that light up to show you if you have your cooled or heated seats on, but there's only 5 lights. So one of the controls has 3 lights and one of them has only 2. In this case, the cooled seats have 3 and the heated have 2. Do you think the heated seat button ever gets jealous that the cooled seat button has that 1 extra light? Something to ponder. And since we're inside, moving on to the steering wheel, take a look at it. It's so thick and contoured and substantial. It's a really serious steering wheel. It looks like it belongs in a sports car. What doesn't belong in a sports car is the paddle shifter situation. This car doesn't have paddles, but rather little switches behind the steering wheel that are supposed to control the transmission. But in these old Mercedes, they're really just sort of suggestions on what to do rather than mandates, which is bizarre. The other thing is weird that it tells you which switch does what with these little tiny metal circles on the steering wheel. One says plus and one says minus for the plus and minus shift paddles. I'm glad Mercedes has gone away from that and gone to actual paddles in its more recent vehicles. And next up, we move on to my favorite control in the CL65, one of my favorite climate controls in any car. Take a look at this. When you have it in auto mode with auto pushed in, the little spokes around auto, well, they're not lit up. Why would they be? They don't have a purpose. But take it out of auto mode and those little spokes suddenly light up. They actually do have a purpose, and you twist the little dial around the auto button to tell the car where you want the air to be sent. Put it back in auto mode and those little diagrams go away because it will automatically choose where to send the air. But again, take it out of auto mode and you have the ability to send the air where you want. Those little things are hidden until you actually have to use them, which is pretty cool. Another interesting quirk about the climate control system is just how many auto features there are. You have that auto control that I already showed you, but in the middle, you have the ability to change the amount of air coming out, or if you push it in, then that puts it in auto mode. And then there's the auto mode in the middle air vents. There are 3 little wheels up there. The ones on the left control how much air is coming out of the middle air vents, but the little wheel in the middle is weird. If you put it all the way down, it sort of sends a burst of cool air. I don't really understand why, but then if you push it all the way up, then it goes back into auto mode, even if you have the lower climate control set to auto and the other lower climate control set to auto. So there are 3 different climate control auto modes in this car. The other thing I find interesting with the climate controls is there's no off button, and you don't just sit there pressing the little lever that controls the airflow until you get it to stop blowing any air at all. Instead, there's a button that's simply marked 0. You push the 0 button and everything stops immediately, and that is how you turn off the climate controls in the CL65. Now, moving on to the gauge cluster of the CL65, there are a couple of interesting things in here, one of which is the fact that the needles are sort of like floating. Both the tachometer needle and the speedometer needle, they don't have like a middle part, they just sort of float around. I think they're magnetic or something like that. It's a really cool look when you're driving down the road. It makes you feel like you're in something sort of futuristic. Less futuristic is the little screen in the gauge cluster that gives various vehicle information. These things are now multicolor and they show pictures of the car. This thing is black and white with giant pixels and it looks incredibly outdated. It does have a couple of interesting features, however. One is that this is the fuel economy for the last few hundred miles. This is the kind of gas mileage you're going to be getting if you get a CL65. Also interesting in that little gauge cluster display screen, when you stop the car and park it and you're about to walk away, that little screen lights up and it says, "Key, do not forget." Key, do not forget. It also has a little picture of an old school key, which is hilarious because, of course, this car is keyless. You never have to remove the key from your pocket. And the Mercedes-Benz key doesn't even look like that old school key anyway. Now, another interesting interesting thing I find in the gauge cluster, in addition to saying V12 bi-turbo to remind you that you're in a CL65, the gauge cluster also says Bosch, which is a supplier, probably the supplier that made the gauge cluster. They're in Germany. They supply Mercedes-Benz with a lot of parts. I'm just sort of surprised Mercedes allowed the Bosch name to be printed so prominently so someone can see it. I bet a lot of people have looked at that and said, who's Bosch? Next up, we move on to the CL65's craziest feature, and that would be the cup holders. Now, a quick glance at the interior, you'll see that it has no cup holders, but in fact, the cup holders are hidden in the center console. You push this little thing, and then the world's most complicated plastic device appears, and it contains the cup holder. And if you push this little button, a second cup holder appears, and it's just incredibly flimsy. You can just kind of shake it, and you can see that this would not hold any drink, and you wouldn't trust it at all. Why would they put so much thought into that cup holder and have it be such a crappy piece? It is absolutely bizarre. Also bizarre is the fact that when you open the little door for the cup holder, you push the button to open it, that's a silver little square. Then you can push a silver triangle to get the second cup holder, and you push a silver rectangle to fold the whole thing back into place. It's all dramatic overkill for a cup holder that, frankly, is probably too flimsy to use. With that said, also in the center console there, I do like the actual center console storage bin and the opening procedure for that. Take a look at this. You press one side and the full center console opens. You press the other side and only the top part opens, which has your little phone connection. That's kind of cool, assuming that you remember which side to press. Next up, moving on to another item in the center, although this one is on the ceiling. It's the SOS button. A lot of Mercedes models have this, and I find it hilarious because you have to be really sure you want to press this button, and that's because it's hidden behind a little door. You push the button and then the door pops open, and then you can actually push the button. Otherwise, the button is hidden behind the door so you don't accidentally press it. It's like firing a missile in a submarine, except it's just an SOS button in a Mercedes-Benz, and that button probably hasn't been connected to anything for like 9 years. But anyway, back to storage, and moving on to the glove box. The glove box isn't particularly interesting, but it does contain the owner's manual, which is inside this giant case that's actually really heavy. It's like as heavy as a laptop. I opened it up to find out why it's so heavy, and I discovered that the owner's manual is split into many different pieces, all of which are massive. The main owner's manual is 454 pages. Then there's an owner's manual for the command infotainment system, which is another 215 pages. The voice control system has another owner's manual, which is 69 pages, and then there's all these leaflets with warranty information and stuff. There's like 1,000 pages hidden inside this case. Now, if you're like me and you're wondering how the owner's manual could possibly be so long, I direct your attention to page 350 and a tab called Practical Hints, and it says what to do if, and then it gives various warning lights and tells you what to do if you've gotten them. This particular one that I'm talking about says what to do if door open warning light comes on, and then it says possible cause, you're attempting to drive with the door open, and then it provides a solution. Close the door. No wonder they have 1,000 pages of owner's manual if they're trying to explain what to do when you see the door open light. Now, despite that giant owner's manual for the infotainment system is actually not all that complicated in this car, and it doesn't have a whole lot of features. There are a couple of things that I found interesting about it, though. If you go into settings, you will see it's not a touchscreen. You have to press the little buttons on the side, but why did they arrange the settings like that? You'll see that there is one of those buttons that is active, and then there's a blank one, and then there's two that are active, and there's another blank one, and it's just completely random. You think they would have skipped every other one, or they would have done it with some sort of pattern, but they didn't, and that continues throughout the entire infotainment system. Also interesting in the infotainment system, in the background of the settings menu, there's a picture of an S-Class and a CL class. I think that's because this infotainment system was used in both cars, and Mercedes-Benz wanted to cover their bases both ways if you had one or the other. And next up, one other interesting storage item inside the CL65, there's a hidden storage compartment underneath the seats. There's one underneath the driver's seat and another one underneath the passenger seat. These are actually pretty common in Mercedes-Benz models. I don't know anybody who stores anything in them, but they're there. Next up, it's time for, well, you know what. Every time I review a two-door car, you people make me climb in the back. It's very uncomfortable for me and very amusing for you, but this car is so massive, it isn't all that hard. You just kind of pull the front seat forward, it automatically glides up, and then you just climb in. It's a little tricky, but it isn't really that bad, and now I'm back here. The problem comes when you want to put the seat back, it automatically goes back into its prior position which of course, that's not gonna be good for me. Now, fortunately, that seat is designed not to crush me. When it senses my knees, it actually stops and moves back forward in order to give me a little bit more room. Now, there are a couple of interesting things in the rear of this car, the most interesting of which is the rear headrest. Now, this Mercedes-Benz, like a lot of Mercedes-Benz models, has a button up front to drop the rear headrest. That's so you can get more visibility if you don't have rear passengers. You push it, they go down, and you can see better. The cool thing about this car, in the back seat, there's also a button to bring them back up. Usually you can drop them with the push of a button, but you have to manually go pull them back up, but not in this car. You just push a button if you're a rear seat passenger and they automatically pop back into place, which is crazy because of course no one is ever going to ride in the back of this car. And speaking of no one is ever going to ride in the back of this car, Mercedes-Benz surely knows that, and that's why even though there's a center armrest back here, it doesn't really have any storage. Instead, that's where Mercedes-Benz chose to put the first aid kit. It's unusually large and its home is the center armrest and the rear middle seat, since they figure no one's gonna ever be riding back here and keeping important documents in there or something. One other cool thing about the rear of this car, and that would be you can drop the back window back here, and then this is all pillarless. It's completely open, and there's no B-pillar stuck up here like in most cars, so you drive around and you can just have the wind blowing around the cabin like you're in a convertible, even though you're in a big coupe. Back in the trunk, you'll find that there isn't really anything unusual about it. It's just a fairly standard trunk, with one exception. There's a little pouch and there's another first aid kit in the trunk. Now remember, there was already a first aid kit in that rear center armrest, so this car has two first aid kits. Mercedes-Benz, how much first aid do you actually think CL owners need? Next up, we got to cover one of my favorite pieces of Mercedes-Benz car design, one of my favorite car design pieces from this entire era, and that would be this rear pillar. Now, this pillar doesn't just sort of come across the roof and intersect the trunk like it would in basically any other car. Instead, it sort of comes down early and then the rear window wraps around. It's a really cool look. You can see it better on silver and white cars, but you can still see it pretty well here, and it looks really cool. Now, this is a nod to Mercedes-Benz coupes and convertibles of the 1960s, back when they were making truly beautiful cars. It's a nice look, and I'm glad this car has it. Mercedes-Benz has basically given up that design element on any of its modern cars. Next up, moving on to the front of this car, a couple of interesting things up here, one of which is the V12 bi-turbo badge on the front fender. That badge is way cooler than V8 bi-turbo or V8 compressor. That's when you know you have a serious AMG car. I also love the fact that this car doesn't have your traditional windshield washer spray nozzles. Instead of two, it has 3 different washer nozzles, because when you're paying 200 grand for a car, well, you get the little luxuries in life. As for the engine, there's not much interesting under here except for the sheer size of it. This is how they cram a 600 horsepower V12 into a Mercedes coupe. It really is impressively huge. I also like the little label under the hood reminding you battery in trunk in very large print, just so you won't freak out when you don't find it under the hood. And so those are all the quirks and features of the CL65, and now we must move on to maybe the best quirk of all, and that would be simply getting behind the wheel of this gigantic, ultra powerful luxury coupe. All right, driving the CL65, now the first thing you notice when you get in this car, even for just a second, is just it feels so solid and just large and heavy. It's almost hard to communicate the way that this car feels in terms of like its solidity and its just luxuriousness. You don't hear anything on the outside. Everything feels heavy. Even pressing the turn signal stalk is like a process, and the stability is just insane. I mean, this is a car that you can just cruise at 120 miles an hour and just live there. All right, and because I'm a little child, I've been in this car 2 minutes, but I can't resist. I have to do it. Wow. The thing about the acceleration in this car is it doesn't happen like in an STI where you floor it and it makes all this racket and it kind of rockets off. This car just builds power like a jet. It's like a little more. Of course, it happens faster than that, but it just, and then suddenly you look down and you're going 130 miles an hour. You don't hear it. There's no drama. There's no like, oh my God, it's incredible. It's just like, floor it, and then yeah, I'm going 120. Of course I am. I put my foot down and I'm in my CL65. It better be. All right, I got another open straightaway here. Leaves me only one choice. Wow. It is incredible how fast this car is. And it does it so drama-free. On the camera, you're gonna say, well, is it fast? I can't hear anything. I can't hear anything either. I'm sitting in here. You don't hear that it's fast, but you feel that it's fast. I was just looking down, and it was amazing to me how fast the speedometer was going. It almost looked like a tack. It's just drama-free, smooth speed at your disposal whenever you want it. All right, so now I'm going 30 behind like a truck here, and you give me a chance to kind of experience the comfort of the CL65, and it is indeed comfortable. It's solid, and it's quiet, and it's so smooth. The ride is so smooth. It doesn't quite eliminate the outside sounds like a Bentley or the very highest end luxury cars. At the end of the day, you're still starting with the CL and the S-Class platform and sort of general vehicle, which was at the time, you know, like a $90,000 car. I mean, even though this thing was like a $200,000 car, the base car is not gonna be able to compete with the true luxury cars. Going around a corner, the car is not athletic, it's not quick to turn, but it's just easy. You turn it and it's predictable and it's an easy wheel to turn. The car doesn't have any or much body roll. Yeah, I mean, the car handles fine. It's stable and it doesn't roll that much and all that stuff, but it's not exactly, you know, a sports car. I mean, this is a big, large, heavy car and you can feel that as you're driving it. With that said, punching out of long sweeping turns, so I'm in the curve and it's, you know, I'm turning the wheel and it's vague and then I punch out. I'm sitting here, I can just imagine the idea of just sitting and going 100 miles an hour on a long road trip. I mean, this feels so nice. Just sitting here on this long, on a straightaway road with you're not doing anything, you're not trying to do anything, you're just kind of sitting there and letting the car take you. And so that's the 2006 Mercedes-Benz CL65 AMG, truly one of the craziest Mercedes models ever made. And in fact, they still make it. You can still get this engine in the S65 Coupe, which is what they call the CL now, or in the S65 sedan, or the SL65, or the G65, which I've already reviewed. But of course, if you get a new one, you'll pay the full $240,000. Or you can get this one at a massive discount. And every time you drive it, you can cross your fingers that nothing happens, because I can only imagine what it costs to repair an out-of-warranty $240,000 twin-turbo V12 AMG Mercedes. Fortunately, I don't have to worry about that. And now it's time for the Doug score. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the CL65 is fine with some nice touches, but it's starting to show its age and it gets a 6 out of 10. Acceleration, it does 0 to 60 in 4.3 seconds and it gets a 7 out of 10. Handling is acceptable, but obviously not tight or sharp given its size, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Cool factor is decent, though this car is pretty subtle. It's only cool if you really know what it is, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Finally, there's importance. This car is released with 3 other 65 models, and the CL has been renamed the S-Class Coupe, so it probably won't go down in history as a famous Mercedes-Benz. Still, it's relatively significant, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Added up, and the weekend score is 30 out of 50, which is decent for a car like this. Next up are the daily categories, starting with features. The CL65 was well equipped for its time, but things have moved on significantly since then, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Comfort is very high, not quite on the level of the best, but not far off, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Quality is okay. The interior is nice and high quality, but I wouldn't want to deal with the mechanical reliability issues, which surely can't be cheap to fix, and it gets only a 5 out of 10. Practicality is okay. It has a strong 12 cubic feet of cargo space, which is good for a car like this. Fuel economy would normally drop its score, but a relatively decent backseat keeps it at a 4 out of 10. As for value, it's a lot of car for the money until it breaks, then it gets expensive fast. It gets a 6 out of 10, bringing the total daily score to 28 out of 50. Add it all up, and the Doug score is 58 out of 100, which is decent given its age and purpose. Here it is compared with some other big cruisers. It hangs with some of them, though it generally gets trounced by the newer ones, as it doesn't have the equipment or the performance to quite match the latest crop of Grand Tourers.